conferences. And we thank Congressman Lawler for providing us with the opportunity to speak, to have with us 3 courageous students, as well as my colleague Alyza Lewin, to discuss an issue that has become tragically more relevant just within the last 24 hours here in Washington, D.C., than it has ever been before. I'm going to say a few words before we talk, but given our gratitude for Congressman Lawler, at the beginning I'll see whether his Chief of Staff, Nate Sewell, would like to say a word by way of
Thank you everyone for being here this morning. Unfortunately, Congressman Lawler, as much of the House was up until wee hours in the morning passing a bill it's been phrased the One Big Beautiful Bill. I consider the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act that we've introduced the One Big Beautiful Bill, but hopefully we'll get a chance to pass that later this year. Obviously, we're gathering here under very somber circumstances this morning following the tragic killing of Yaron and Sarah. So if we, if we want to all join in a short moment of silence for them, and then we can start. With that, I'll hand it back. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you to the Brandeis Center for all the fantastic work that you do. Appreciate the partnership.
Thank you, Nate. Thank you, Nate, and please convey to Congressman Lawler our thanks not just for his hospitality this morning, but for his leadership on this issue, not just with the legislation that you mentioned, but in a host of matters affecting the Jewish community. We gather in shock and mourning in the immediate aftermath of the slaying of Sarah and Yaron by a gunman who chanted, "Free, free Palestine." We know what is meant by free, free Palestine. It means free Palestine of the Jews. There's another saying that often goes with it. They chant, "Globalize the Intifada." Now we know what globalize the Intifada means. It means free the world of Jews. When this happens, we can't look aside. We can't be silent. We must act. As a community, we are now going through the stages of grief. And it is appropriate for us to remember that one of those stages is anger. This is not a time for violence, but this is not a time for silence either. We have to understand that what is happening on campuses around the United States and on too many elementary and public school grounds, what is happening from the schoolyard to the campus to the corporation is now happening in the streets. And when we ignore those who call for the death of the Jews, we should not be surprised when there is bloodshed like we have seen in Washington, D.C. So while today's event would have been sadly timely under any circumstances, it comes at a moment when we need not to be afraid, not to shrink back, but to redouble our efforts. In that context, I am especially grateful for those who are standing up or making their voices heard. My colleague Alyza Lewin, who will moderate today's event, has long been a champion for the Jewish people and for justice for all. Before she was president of the Louis D. Brandeis Center, she was a founding member of the law firm of Lewin and Lewin, a longtime advocate for religious freedom, and president of the American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists, and we'll be glad to have her speak as well as to moderate. We're honored to welcome also 3 courageous students today who have generously agreed to share their firsthand experiences with us. Their stories offer valuable insight into the challenges that Jewish students have faced and continue to face on campus. To help protect their privacy and ensure their safety, we ask that you refer to them only by their first names. They've already endured a great deal, and we deeply appreciate their willingness to speak with us today. One of the main topics for today is not just anti-Semitism, but defining anti-Semitism. Over the last several hours, there are several public officials who have clearly and specifically indicated that what we saw last night was an anti-Semitic hate crime. Most of them, however, are Israeli. Many American officials are waiting to be more specific or explicit in identifying what they've seen, as if we didn't have a definition of what is anti-Semitism. But in fact, we have a definition of anti-Semitism, one that has been embraced by a majority of our states, that's built into the Executive Order on Combating Anti-Semitism, and which is now used by over 1,000 entities around the world. At this moment in particular, we have to be clear about what we're facing. Yes, it's violence. Yes, it's a hate crime. Yes, it appears to be an act of terrorism. Yes, when there is a killing of people who come together for a humanitarian cause at a Jewish institution, for a Jewish organization, in the name of Jewish identity, we have to acknowledge that this is the hatred of Jews, and we must say that we will not stand for it. In light of all of this, I'm pleased to welcome my colleague Alyza Lewin, and also to ask the students to come to the table. Thank you, and thank you all.
However, the events of last night have actually superseded that, because now what I feel I need to show you is how we connect the dots between what's going on campus and what these students experienced and the murders that took place last night. Because there is a direct line that connects the anti-Semitic extremist ideology that we have been seeing and watching spread on campuses and beyond campuses, and the murder of Jews that took place just last night outside the Capitol Jewish Museum. Yaron Lashinsky and Sarah Milgram, may their memories be blessed, were murdered last night by an individual who went to a Jewish location to target Jews who were attending a Jewish event. That's a moment now that we have crossed. Right? It is a level of targeting that those of us who have been working in this space have lived in dread and in fear that we would one day see. Shootings like last night don't happen in a vacuum. They're the result and the culmination of a progression. The ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, actually has a graphic. They call it their pyramid of hate. You can find it online. But if you do, you'll see that the base of the pyramid, right, where it all begins, is with what they call biased attitudes. And if biased attitudes aren't addressed, those escalate, right? You start to get the jokes, and then the shunning, and the marginalizing. And then if that's not addressed, it escalates again to actual exclusion and to actual discrimination against the group, right, that's been the target of the biased attitudes. And if you don't address that, then it continues to escalate. And then we get violence. We get vandalism. We get assaults. We get what we were seeing on campuses when they had the encampments and when they were surrounding students, and then when they were taking over buildings, like what happened at Columbia and Butler College, where they were defacing and destroying the properties. Beautiful buildings on campus that have been destroyed by the vandalism and the assaults on Jewish students. Now, last night, it escalated to another whole new level. Last night, we had Jews who were hunted down and targeted as Jews. We are at a moment that calls out for urgency. It's a moment where we must act. And the question is, why? Why is it that society has let this go on? Let this progression take place. Let us get to this point. To even begin to address the biased attitudes. Why? Because we are allowing those who engage in the hostility and the targeting to deliberately mischaracterize their bias as a legitimate political debate. What is taking place on campus, what is spreading beyond campus, is not a legitimate political debate. It is the targeting, marginalizing, shunning, vilification of Jews on the basis of what defines us as Jews. Because mind you, Jews are not defined only by religious belief and religious practice. Jews are also a people. And as a people, we have a shared ancestral and ethnic heritage that is deeply rooted in the land of Israel. The Jews are a people indigenous to the land of Israel. Today, if you say that, if you embrace that part of Jewish identity, if you embrace Jewish peoplehood, if you believe and embrace our Jewish history, you're labeled as Zionists. It doesn't matter what your political opinions are. You become a pariah if you say, I define my Jewishness as being part of a people indigenous to the land of Israel. And we've seen from our brave students here on campus just what that shunning, that bullying, that targeting looks like. And so we have to address the biased attitudes. But what happens if society refuses to recognize those biased attitudes as biased attitudes? What if they deliberately accept the mischaracterization of those biased attitudes? Well, that's when we see like what happened to our students, and I'm just going to highlight again a couple of these points. Zach talked about the article he wrote in the Lumberjack. And in that article, what started the whole progression for him was he mentioned in his article that he had had a conversation with, quote, a close friend and business mentor who prides themselves on their knowledge of indigenous history, as well as supporting minorities, self-determination, and equal rights. And in the article, he talks about how he began discussing Jewish history with this individual. And he says, and I continue, I quote, since I trusted her as someone who's extremely educated on these topics, I wanted to understand her perspective on the current conflict, however different it might be from mine. A conversation I assume would lead to progress for both of us. But what happened after that conversation? He goes on and he says, and I quote, after this conversation, I discovered that she had unfollowed me, unshared her location, and essentially cut me out of her life completely. When I asked why, or if she would have another meaningful conversation with me, she said no, because of our, quote, fundamental disagreements. You might wonder, what were those fundamental disagreements? Well, Zach in his article explains. He says, quote, the fundamental disagreement being that Jews are from the land of modern-day Israel. He said he believed the Jews are a people indigenous to the land of Israel, and then he was branded and treated as a pariah. So bad that the targeting, right, got to be so bad online, the social media posts, which, mind you, specifically pointed to this piece, right? There were posts online which said, criticized him for, quote, just regurgitating the Zionist talking point that all Jews are indigenous to Israel, parentheses, not true whatsoever, right? This reality that the Jews are a people indigenous to the land of Israel is what is right now today being used to target Jews. It's being used as the basis to exclude and shun Jews. When last night's murderer chanted, free, free Palestine, what was he seeking? A Palestine, as Ken Marcus said to him, free of Jews. Lada's the student advocate on behalf of all the students, the liaison between the student government, the faculty, the staff, the administration, and she was involved in all sorts of efforts to benefit all of the students on campus. But what she started to see was that nobody was mentioning or speaking up on behalf of the Jewish community on campus. which, mind you, is a minority on campus, right? And so when there were demonstrations during finals and the school was not enforcing its time, place, and manner restrictions, she noted it and said, look, having these demonstrations during finals in the academic buildings or close to where the exams are is disruptive for all students, and particularly when Jewish students are listening to these chants about how Zionists aren't welcome. Or when the school refused to address the latest round of swastikas on campus, she highlighted. And suddenly, actually trying to make sure that Jewish concerns were included and not erased and denied, she got branded a Zionist and actually pushed out of her position in student government. And then Asha highlighted the need for us to recognize these chants for the anti-Semitism that they are, right? When he points to groups that are talking about globalizing the Intifada, those were both the first and the second Intifada were targeting Jews in Israel for murder. They were looking to maim and kill Jews in very vicious, bloody attacks, suicide bombings, attacks on buses. There was a knifing Intifada. You remember that? Some years ago. Globalizing Intifada means exactly what it says. Take it global. Bring it to our country. And that's what happened last night. They globalized the Intifada. They brought that effort to hunt down, target Jews, not only to the streets of America, but to the streets of the capital of the United States of America. So it's time for us to recognize and be able to distinguish between the legitimate political debate, right, and the vilification of Jews. And that is exactly what the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism does. The IHRA definition of anti-Semitism helps individuals understand the difference between what the definition calls, quote, criticism of Israel similar to that leveled against any other country. Right? The IHRA definition makes clear and says explicitly that criticism of Israel similar to that leveled against any other country cannot be considered anti-Semitic. Okay, so we're going to distinguish between that kind of legitimate political debate on the one hand and the vilification, the demonization, the delegitimization, or the application of double standards to Jews or to Israel as the Jewish collective. When that is what we're talking about, that is anti-Semitism. The precursor to the IHRA definition is actually, you can see, and it's helpful for understanding the IHRA definition, if you go and you Google, our State Department adopted in 2010 a definition of anti-Semitism based on the precursor to the IHRA definition. And the two definitions, 2010 and IHRA, are almost word for word identical. But one of the main differences is that both definitions have an initial definition and a series of examples. The main difference is that in 2010, the State Department, they pulled out the examples relative to Israel, put them on a second page under a heading. You can go, if you go to the State Department, you can find this link. They put it under a heading that says, what is anti-Semitism relative to Israel? And you can look and compare side by side to see all these examples are in the IHRA definition. They're just not pulled out under a separate heading. But what is anti-Semitism relative to Israel is exactly the issue that we are trying to understand now today. It's still the same. And what they do is they put the examples into three categories: demonize, double standard, and delegitimize. Demonize is if you think about and envision that awful anti-Semitic caricature of the hook-nosed, evil, conniving, bloodthirsty Jew, but you realize that that's being applied not just to individual Jews, but to Israel as the Jewish collective. We're not talking about criticism of Israel similar to that level against any other country. We're not talking about criticism of specific policies. We're just saying Israel is evil. That demonization, that's anti-Semitic. Double standards? Think about it. That's the definition of discrimination, when you're going to treat one group differently than everybody else. If you're going to apply double standards to the Jewish collective, to the Jewish nation state of Israel, hold it to higher standards, different standards than you apply to anyone else, to any other country, that's interesting. And the last one, delegitimization. And that's one so crucial for us to understand when we talk about Zionism and Zionists. Delegitimization is defined as denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination, either by suggesting that Israel has no right to exist, or by suggesting that Israel is a racist endeavor. Why is that anti-Semitism and not a political debate? I'll tell you why. Because if Jews have defined what it means to be Jewish, not only by religious belief and religious practice, but if Jews recognize that we are a people, and as a people we have a history rooted in the land of Israel, it is because we are a people, and Israel is our ancestral home, that gives us the legitimacy and the right to self-determination and sovereignty in some borders in our ancestral homeland. If you're going to say you don't have a right to self-determination in any borders in your ancestral homeland, what you're really saying, which is what we're hearing them say, is you're not a people, and you don't have any history in the land of Israel. And that's what we're seeing today on campuses and beyond, this determined effort to erase and deny the Jews, that Jewish people exist as a people, and that we have a history rooted in the land of Israel. This erasure and denial of Jewish history and heritage, call it erasive anti-Semitism, but it is today's anti-Semitism, and it needs to be recognized as such. That's why we need the IHRA definition, because the IHRA definition is the one and only definition accepted, first of all, not only by legal scholars, but by governmental bodies across and around the world. And quite frankly, recognized by the United States as the definition we use when we look external. When we look abroad, we use the IHRA definition. It makes no sense whatsoever for us not to be utilizing the IHRA definition across the board domestically to recognize and understand that when we have chants like Free Palestine or Globalized Intifada, those are anti-Semitic chants. Those are not expressions of legitimate political debate. They are calls for the targeting and erasure and elimination of Jews. So my call to you today is we have to act. The time to act is now. We have to act. We have to make sure that this, that universities, that the general public understand the difference between a legitimate political debate and the vilification of Jews. We have to call out the anti-Semitism, we have to act against the anti-Semitism, and we have to use every single tool in our toolbox, because nothing less than the values that we hold dear as Americans is at stake. We know what happens to societies that allow anti-Semitism to flourish. They rot. So let's commit to working today, tomorrow, and the next day. If anything, the events of last night should give us, as Ken said, the energy to double down and work even harder to make sure that our country remains a place where all people, including all Jewish people, right, can live freely, can engage fully, and can participate safely in everything that this amazing country